The Emperor of Mankind is a complex character, but there are many facets to him. With his soul divided into what are now essentially multiple entities, his apotheosis questioned even by Reboot Guilliman, and multiple 35-plus-year-old storylines coming to a head in The End and the Death, I thought it was time to talk about the Star Child, the Dark King, the Primordial Annihilator, and the return of the Emperor of Mankind. But one thing I want to address before getting into it is the way the community looks at the Emperor, as the man who is becoming a god, or perhaps did become a god. And from my perspective, after making this video, I would suggest that it is quite the opposite. The Emperor may just be a god who came into the physical universe and became a man. For much of what we know about him has been called into question recently. With that said, let's dive in. Because the Emperor had to shed his loyalty, compassion, empathy, and love in order to fight and defeat his favored son, Horus Lupercal, he was not entirely whole when he was interred upon the Golden Throne. For those parts of him are basically a seed that he planted in the warp. A piece of the Emperor that is growing steadily, and over time, it will shake the pillars of the warp itself and challenge the very gods of chaos and their vile dominion. Now, the Star Child goes back to the earliest days of Warhammer 40k, and appears first in the Realms of Chaos book, The Lost and the Damned, from 1990. Now, before we break this one out and go over this very old lore, I just want to say that it is something that most of the community feels was retconned decades ago, so many are baffled as to why it is showing up again in the 2020s all these years later. So let's address this. It was never retconned officially. It just stopped being mentioned. That's all there is to it. So showing up after not being mentioned for 30 years is actually pretty awesome, and a real treat for a guy like me who loves the old lore. Okay, now straight from The Lost and the Damned. The Star Child. As the spirit of the Emperor drifted through the warp, it gradually dissolved into the flow of energy, returning to the cosmic force of the nature of the warp in its uncorrupted form. Only a tiny core of the Emperor's humanity remained whole, like a small child bobbing upon the tide of a colossal storm in a tiny reed boat. Thus the soul of the Emperor was cast adrift into the warp. While the Emperor's soul survived, there was still hope for mankind. For just as the new man had been born from the collective souls of the shamans of old, so the Emperor's soul might be reborn one day. But one day would lie far in the future, when the cries of a new savior would strengthen the core of the Emperor's soul and rekindle it into a new life. Meanwhile, the soul of the Emperor was merely a potential, a child awaiting birth, the Star Child. The humans that were left in charge of the Imperium had no real understanding of what had happened to the Emperor. The concept that he could be born again never occurred to them. To the rulers of the Imperium, the Emperor continues to live, though his body was broken by means of his indisputable powers. Only a few select individuals learned the secret over the following millennia, and they became the highly secret brotherhood known as the Illuminati. The Illuminati await the birth of the Star Child and the second coming of the new man. They know that their knowledge makes them dangerous heretics in the eyes of the Imperium, and consequently maintain a strict secrecy over their activities. Meanwhile, the Illuminati remains a secret force in human space, working away behind the machinery of government and commerce, preparing the way for the birth of the new man. The Sensei. When a champion of Khorne, Nurgle, or any other chaos power pledges himself to the service of his patron power, his very soul becomes part of the power's energies. The Star Child also has his champions, known as the Sensei. Although they do not necessarily know their true identity, these people are actually descended from the Emperor's own descendants, and their genetic structure is similar to his. Not all the Emperor's descendants are Sensei, and almost none of them realize that they carry genes from the Emperor, or that it is this which gives them their powers. The fortuitous combination of genes the Sensei have inherited from the Emperor makes them very special. Their most important trait is their immortality. Although they can be killed, they do not age, and possess amazing powers of recovery. They are also protected from the chaos powers, and the untainted flow of the warp can move through them unimpeded. A Sensei cannot experience hate, bitterness, or irrational anger because these things are part of the disharmony of the chaos powers. They radiate natural confidence and harmony, and can even draw upon the energies of the warp to use their psychic powers. Sensei do not risk attracting demons or other malicious psychic forces by using their powers. Being untainted by chaos, they are utterly invulnerable to the predations of the chaos powers. In fact, because they harbor no trace of the emotions and concepts embodied by the chaos powers, they are largely invisible to them. Sensei are heroes who wander throughout the galaxy, sometimes in the company of a select band of other powerful heroes. The psychic powers of a sensei make him a dangerous heretic in the eyes of the Imperium, so that he and his followers risk capture and death at the hands of the Inquisition or other Imperial forces. They are not so much the enemies of the Imperium as of repression and injustice in all their guises. Repression exists throughout the Imperium, much of it justified, but not all by any means. Wherever a sensei appears, he can be sure of huge popular support, while the forces of oppressive government recognize him as an implacable foe. So we can see that this part of the Emperor is out there. It is growing in power, and there are those with the power to facilitate the Emperor's return to a physical body through the Star Child. A couple years earlier in Realms of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness, they mentioned the Sensei for the first time ever, and there was a plot to create the Sensei Emperor hatched by the Illuminati. And yes, the Illuminati was a very hot topic in the fringes of the underground in the 80s and 90s, and yes, Warhammer was very underground at this point. And Steve Jackson was one of the OGs at Games Workshop. Everyone was reading the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. It was a whole thing. So, at its core, there has always been a war waging in the background, constantly, for millennia. A totally secret war between powerful secret societies like the Sensei and the Illuminati, and the Inquisition, not to mention the Cognitae and the Cabal, etc. So there are a lot of secret hidden hands in Warhammer 40k, and there always has been. Now, as recently as 3rd edition, there was mention of the Star Child and how the Inquisition is hunting down the Sensei in the rulebook. It is in the format of a transmission from an Inquisitor Lord to other forces within the Inquisition, possibly to the High Lords of Terra. Either way, let's look at that. If you aren't familiar with the 3rd edition rulebook, it is an absolute gem and has quotes and Imperial propaganda and inspirational text for soldiers and citizens on every page practically. My favorite of all, and I live my real life by this motto: a dagger in the dark is worth 1,000 swords at dawn. I mean, that quote alone is worth the price of the book. But here we go, from the 3rd edition rulebook. Date 398997 M41. From Inquisitor Fortes, in reference to the elimination of the Temple of the Star Child. Trust no one else and trust yourself less. As you well know, I was dispatched to Levelnor to investigate the growing power of an anti-imperial cartel called the Temple of the Star Child, or Star Cult for short. We had been hearing rumors of cult members gathering on Levelnor 4 for some time, seemingly drawn to some center point. We allowed this to continue until we were sure that all the important cult members were present on the planet. Extensive study of the cult's beliefs makes for interesting reading. The members of the cult were wholly unaware of their heretical ideals and believed that their doctrines were serving the Emperor in the guise of the Star Child. They were assured that the Star Child entity was merely another aspect of the beneficent Emperor, a more benign creature than the true master of mankind, although there can ultimately be none more benevolent than the true Emperor. Praise be to him. The highest-ranking cult members were known as Sensei, and they were firm in their belief that they were children of the Emperor, sired long ago before the founding of the Imperium. These Sensei certainly possessed strange powers and great charisma, and their deluded followers were only too happy to reinforce their spurious beliefs. At first, even I was given momentary pause and considered a possibility that, indeed, these people had been chosen by the Emperor for some higher purpose, though I never, for a moment, credited the idea that they were the Emperor's offspring. However, seeing the kind of scum they dealt with and attracted to their cause, my suspicions were returned. Rebel humans, ghastly abhumans, and even the vile Eldar consorted with these Sensei. Such hideous companions would never be tolerated by a true favorite of the Emperor, and I ordered the cult examined in close detail. At first, myself and my companions could find nothing drastically threatening about the ceremonies and celebrations devoted to the so-called Star Child. The Sensei believed that they would achieve a higher state of being when the Star Child would grip them in rapture and elevate them to the heavens. This elevation, which they called the apotheosis, struck a chord with my learned colleague, Inquisitor Alexio, who reminded us of the deluded belief of chaos worshippers that their god will grant them eternal life and everlasting power. Spurred by these thoughts, we examined the Star Cult in greater detail. After several long months of infiltration and examination, we came to a number of horrifying conclusions. There was no doubt in the minds of the Temple's members, including the Sensei, that this Star Child was a truly magnanimous and noble entity, dedicated to securing mankind's future. However, as we observed the cult even more closely, we started recognizing certain phrases, gestures, and ceremonial accoutrements which stirred our memories of the Thrandos cult we destroyed 14 years ago. The Thrandos cult was utterly dedicated to the worship of the great sorcerer, the architect of fate. Here we saw sigils and signs pointing toward that felled deity. Was it possible that the great conspirator was masquerading as this Star Child entity, sending false visions and dreams and manipulating those debased cult members? Of course it was possible. No intrigue is too convoluted, no path too twisted for the changing Lord to follow. Our suspicions were confirmed weeks later when Inquisitor Alexios' Emperor-gifted inner eye detected the foul taint of the great sorcerer during one of the cult's main ceremonies. This was incontrovertible proof that the Temple of the Star Child posed a threat to the stability of Level Nor and the surrounding systems. Our request for aid was answered by the Salamanders chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. They executed the annihilation of the Star Cult with admirable expediency. And I must say, we took some personal gratification by removing those of the Sensei who were present. These trusting, misguided, gullible fools were more of a threat to the Imperium than any number of malevolent worshippers. Who could tell what damage had been caused by their stupid magics and inconsiderate association with aliens and malign influences? Inquisitor Credo is embarking on hunting down 4 other Sensei who did not journey to Level Nor 4. I wish him every success in his endeavors and hope he garners the success he deserves. Inquisitor Alexio is remaining here on Level Nor to ensure the Temple of the Star Child is truly eradicated. I am heading to the asteroidal mining colony of Vanor 21 to follow up rumors of Lord Varlak gathering another army for rebellion. Is there nothing that will rid us of this heretic? Inquisitor Fortes, Level Nor 4. So, the Illuminati, the Sensei, the Star Child, that is one aspect of the Emperor and will be intrinsic going forward if the Emperor is to remain the savior of humanity and hold back the tidal wave of chaos that threatens to drown us at all moments. But there's a much darker side, a much darker aspect to the Emperor of mankind, and we see this when Guilliman meets his father again after 10,000 years and goes to the Golden Throne. He's so rattled by his experience he cannot fully recall it. It sounds like he was tripping balls, maybe huffing nitrous, I don't know, but the Emperor had a profound, mind-altering effect upon him. And Guilliman is smart. He realizes that the thing he's conversing with is not even a single unified consciousness, but like pieces of a shattered mirror, each reflecting a different perspective back at him. He's confronted by the fact that the guy on the throne is lacking in empathy, loyalty, love, compassion, morality, all the things that Big E had to cast off to defeat Horus. But only Malkador knew that is what the Emperor had been required to do. Only the hero was privy to that knowledge, as he had watched the Emperor cast aside the aspect of the Dark King in The End and the Death too. For Guilliman, it would be a long process of understanding slowly that his father was out there in the warp, a force of unreality, a god. Just as the citizens and ecclesiarchs tell him, the fanatics he despises so much, he's slowly coming around to see that there is truth to what they say, on some level at least, for the Emperor provides many miracles, and his angels, or rather his demons, the Imperial Saints, are real and do appear in war zones and turn the tide in his holy name. The opening of the Great Rift has let in more Empyrean energies to real space than anything in history, so the warp is bleeding into real space, and that is why it is getting easier for the Emperor, or that noble shard of him, to intervene in the affairs of humanity and our struggles, and also why psychers are so rampant now. Humanity is evolving into that psychic race that it was feared we'd become. Guilliman becomes possessed by the Emperor to save him from the Godblight and defeat Mortarion and burn not only the Garden of Nurgle, but the Plague God himself. Guilliman is on his way to becoming a true believer. He's even read Lorgar's work, the Lectitio Divinitatis. Guilliman has no choice. As a rationally minded man, he must believe what he's personally experienced. But it is rather important to say that Guilliman knows these miracles, his own resurrection, etc., are not coming from the psychotic, tortured corpse on the golden chair. They're coming from the Emperor's soul, from the warp, from the part of him that he had to cast off. The Star Child is becoming. Now we know that the good, the compassion, the loyalty of the Emperor is the Star Child, and there are multiple secret societies trying to help him come to physical reality or opposing that. But what about the part of him that is stuck on the throne? Or what about the part of him that will one day, inevitably, destroy not only mankind, but possibly the entirety of physical reality itself? To defeat Horus, even to arrive at Lupercal's court, the Emperor had a hard job ahead of him, and on the way, he drank in so much power from the warp that he practically couldn't stop. He stood on the threshold of true godhood. He would become, in physical space, a chaos god, the Dark King, which was prophesied to come and destroy everything. The prophecy from before humanity even existed. Probably the old ones themselves divined this. And the Dark King was on everyone's lips during the Horus Heresy. Tarot cards on both sides were showing his ascension. It seemed the coming of the greatest and most powerful warp entity of all was an absolute inevitability. But everyone assumed at first that it was referring to Horus, that he was the Dark King, the Chaos God Ascendant, but it became the Emperor, or rather it. It took his oldest friend, Elanius Pius, to talk him out of it. Throw away the dark aspect, lest you become the very thing you seek to destroy, was the basic message. Malcador's watching it happen from the Golden Throne, unable to let anyone know what he's witnessing. For there is no now, or rather, there is only now, the isochronal instant. All of the pasts, all of the presents, all of the futures, even the grim darkness of far futures, are bound up into one simultaneous solid, a spool of time wrapped into one tight ball, with no end and no beginning to unpick, blown like a loose feather on the currents of the warp. That is my anchor, not a still point in time, but all time stilled. I lock myself and the raving throne to that tiny moat of infinite stillness and calm the machine's frenetic mania. And in that now I begin to see all the other nows too. I can see that the stakes have changed. There's a new factor, a new now that has become merely an if. The now of Horus triumphant, the now of Lupercal as transcendent owner of the night, is cracking and distorting, fusing and bubbling. No longer a certainty. It is caught in the light of a brighter filament of the asynchronous totality. A blinding light, white, lethal, and pure, cast by a single rising star. A fierce and steadfast thing that is too furious to behold directly. It is the star I saw before, as my sight failed and death came for me. It is the Emperor, empowered by the warp, the brightest thing in the galaxy. His light is everywhere. It spills across all other nows. It bleaches the pulped battlescapes of Terra into whiteness. It catches the lines of Valdor's war gear and glints on the harder edges of his too transformed thoughts. It slowly eats away the shadow under the red wall where Dorn shelters, talking to himself. It burns the soul of Sanguinius, though he is buried deep in a lightless crypt. It is the light that casts the shadow of the Dark King. I try to speak. I still cannot. The steadfast light is everywhere, permeating every now that was and could be. In one ancient, inhuman creature's pause in their work, look up from half-built devices of intricate complexity and shield their eyes against the rising glare. They start to wail. In another, the world is without form, and void and darkness moves upon the face of the deep, and the steadfast light says, "Let me be." and it is. And another, and another, and an infinity of others. There is only light, and its antithesis has burned everything away with its unholy intensity. Only in one now, a gloomy and decaying now, does the light not penetrate. It is a realm of shadows and candlelight, a grim darkness of ruin and despair where men are shackled by ancient duties, imperfectly remembered but obsessively performed, where lamp glow flickers off the flaking glint of past glories and the faded majesty of once proud emblems, where the functions of machines and the purposes of humans are forgotten or misunderstood and have been reduced to rote and ceremony and rite, and now where everything, including the meaning of life, has become no more than rehearsed tradition and meaningless ritual. I cannot speak. I cannot block the light. I can only seize upon these unexpected scraps of suddenly renewed strength to expend my fraying will and guide the few who might still hear me. They are almost out of reach now, and I have all but forgotten their names. Yet still I strive to call to them, to steer them, in the hope that one of them will listen, and one of them, just one, will be enough. The Dark King exists. That we know. The Emperor casts off the mantle, refused to ascend into that terrible being. But one thing the community is really dropping the ball on putting together is that is actually just a temporary situation. We know that the Dark King will eventually be born. We know that since demons are of the warp, that they always exist there, as time is meaningless in the Imperium. The Dark King is a full-on chaos god, and is attached to a birth moment in real space, though that has been postponed. But we know that he's there, and we know that it is the Emperor who becomes him, or rather is him. And this is where we get to the meat of all this. As if you've seen my video on the 8 gods of chaos and their etheric dominions in Warhammer 40k, or if you've read the Horus Heresy supplement, The Burning of Omnamat, that is on the Warhammer community site as a free PDF, you'll know that Samus the demon, literally known as the End and the Death, is a servant of, a greater demon of, the Dark King. And we know from that supplement that the demon Samus is also listed as being an aspect of the one force that is in the center of the 8-pointed Chaos Star, the one etheric dominion that is above all others, the center of the Cyclone, the Eye of the Storm, that of the Primordial Annihilator, basically the pure embodiment of Chaos Undivided. Big E is an avatar of the King of the Chaos Gods. He's the earthly embodiment of their Zeus figure, their Odin. Why was he able to wrest power from the gods on Moloch? How is it that he can drink from the literal warp itself and wield it as both sword and shield, as weapon and protection? One day the throne will fail. One day the Emperor's corpse will truly be cut off from all that sustains it, the thousands of psychers a day, and when it does, nothing will be anchoring any aspect of him to reality. The Great Rift is making more and more psychers appear throughout humanity, and the warp and real space are becoming more and more intertwined. But those seers who can see deep into the future know that humanity ends in the same way that the Eldar did, with the birth of a foul, malignant god that devours the majority of the race and casts down the Empire. Only this time, this god is much more powerful than Slaanesh, and it doesn't only destroy humanity, but the entire galaxy, possibly universe. Now, it may just be an irony that perhaps all that can stop this most evil, this most high of the Chaos Gods from enacting our utter destruction and consuming us all, is that noble shard that the Emperor cast off, that part of himself that became the Star Child. But when he cast that part off, what was left? Only the most tyrannical, sadistic, heartless, psychopathic, and terrible parts. Casting off his compassion to face Horus, in effect, created that other half of him as well, that dark half, which is destined to become the Dark King, the avatar of the Primordial Annihilator. It is an irony on a galactic scale that doing what he had to do to save humanity created our very destruction, with only his other loyal and compassionate shard standing between us and our end by his own doing. For in the end, if it is true that the big four gods are actually beneath and subservient to the Dark King, even they won't be much help against the Star Child. Everyone, everything, from the dark gods to the word bearers, seem to harbor an extreme fear of the Star Child. It's worth noting also that Malcador reflects that the crisis is averted for now when it comes to the Dark King. But he and the Emperor both know that it is an inevitability, and perhaps there is more to why the Emperor sharded his soul than just defeating Horus. We can deduce that since Horus was not ever going to become the Dark King, that he was never going to win no matter what. Like it really just could not happen. And this brings to question, what is it that the Cabal showed Alpharius and Omegon in the Book Legion? What did the Acuity reveal to them? Because when it comes to the Cabal, they made multiple efforts to recruit Primarchs to their cause, and we know that the one thing they wanted less than anything was for the Emperor to win. They really believed that if he was victorious over Horus, that would be the absolute worst outcome of all possibilities. And we know they referred to the horror that was to be unleashed as the Primordial Annihilator. They also maintained that Ferrus Manus would be a good ally against the Annihilator, but he turns against them, which occurs in the story Feet of Iron. Ferrus is definitely unaware that the Emperor has any evil side to him beyond just conqueror, warrior, space Stalin. You know, the typical tyrannical traits he knew his father to have, traits necessary for any galactic ruler. So I found it very interesting that the Farseers of the Cabal, the Eldar ones at least, referred to the Primordial Annihilator as if it were an individual singular being like Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, or Tzeentch, but also as if it were literally chaos undivided. And all that tracks. Alpha Legion had to play into the deception and infiltrate the alien cult and work both for, around, and against them, as is their way. And if they hadn't, then the outcome of the heresy would have been very, very different. But Ferrus Manus was more stubborn and even refused to listen when the Cabal approached him, which tells me that fighting the Primordial Annihilator and the inevitability of its birth was a last-ditch effort for the Cabal. An act of desperation, reaching out, grasping at straws, as they had little means of affecting the future. They had to appeal to the sons of the Emperor to show them what he'd become and ultimately what they had been fighting for. Big E, the God Emperor of mankind, is both a god of light and the perseverance of humanity, and the Dark King waiting to be born. And the powers of the warp know this. Big E is probably all that will be able to save us from Big E. The Star Child and the Dark King are eternally locked in conflict, but they are intrinsically intertwined and two sides of the same coin. Basically a yin-yang. So this is where we get to the King in Yellow in the current storyline. I believe that what is going on with the Yellow King, if he even exists, is completely wrapped up in the Star Child and the Dark King. If it is truly Valdor, then perhaps what he is working on is a way to either bring the Star Child to real space or to keep the Dark King in check. Possibly even to separate that entity entirely from any possible futures of humanity, thus aborting it before it is even born in a sense. Whatever the case, it is very interesting to see 30K and 40K coming together, and see the long narrative that's been playing out for decades come to fruition. Which brings me to the current moment, now, 2025. Pandemonium is known to be done, yet delayed for lore reasons, possibly Amazon live-action series related. The live-action series is heavily rumored to center around Inquisitor Eisenhorn, and therefore will be attached to the King in Yellow storyline, if only tertially, if that rumor does indeed turn out to be true. Not many plot threads go on this long in Warhammer, and the Star Child goes back to Rogue Trader, and the original Warhammer 40k fiction, literally the first storyline we got in the setting, Ian Watson's Inquisitor, which was renamed Draco and became a series. But yeah, 35 years solid of plot all coming together, and the timing of all this, in an age where Primarchs are returning to the setting of Warhammer 40k left and right, in an age when the lost Primarchs themselves are being teased like crazy, when many of the mysteries are being looked at deeply, if not just outright revealed, clutch your pearls more in the comments, kiddies. We are fast approaching the 40th birthday of Warhammer 40k. It literally turns 38 in a couple of months, so we're well on our way. And this is where the Emperor comes back, I'm sure of it. And no, I doubt that he'll get a tabletop model of any kind for Warhammer 40k, but that won't stop Games Workshop from bringing him into the 31st millennium. Why wouldn't they? Horus Lupercal got 2 miniatures, and one is Horus Ascended, and the argument that I have heard most why Big E will never get a miniature is that he'd be way too powerful on the tabletop. But that argument flies out the window now, as Horus was confirmed to be much stronger than the Emperor in the End and the Death. Maybe he grew in power some between stepping out of the warp gate on Moloch and the final battle on the Vengeful Spirit, but he's basically god tier from the moment he emerges from the warp gate, and there's no other model on that power level to oppose him. Horus is standing alone, in his own peerless way, a solitary figure in his own personal weight class, very much in need of a foe worthy of his might. So given all that, we have multiple at-odds aspects of the Emperor operating in Warhammer 40k, and given the need for something to balance Horus's power on the tabletop, we could probably assume that an Emperor model will be coming for the Horus Heresy. 40 years of 40k is a very big deal, and they won't want to miss the opportunity to make that matter in a massive way. But that doesn't mean he's appropriate for 40k. Or, moreover, since he isn't appropriate for 40k as it stands currently, it would still be quite a big thing to do for the community to give us a Big E model for 30k. After all, who doesn't want to play out the ultimate final battle that determined the fate of the galaxy? Who doesn't want to play out those stories on the tabletop? I know I have wanted to ever since seeing the original diorama. What was it, a Mike McVeigh piece? To wrap everything up here, yes, the Emperor is complex. He's the only thing saving us from the Primordial Annihilator, which it turns out is both the Dark King of the Chaos Pantheon and also the Emperor himself, which is still less confusing than a lot of our current real-world religions. And Games Workshop would be foolish not to put out an Emperor model for 30k. That would be leaving a fleet of dump trucks of cash on the table. And he's actually needed, as we do have his main opponent, the Favored Son, already as a Chaos Ascended being on the cusp of total godhood. And it is a totally awesome model too, probably among the best Primarch models if I'm being totally honest. It is all coming together. 100 storylines, dozens of plots playing out across decades in the real world and millennia in the setting, all coalescing into a cohesive thing, possibly for the first time since Warhammer started, because we're going live action, and the franchise is going to explode, for better or for worse. And the Emperor of Mankind has evolved from the one and only thing that is holding the Imperium together as it slowly rots and heads towards its own death and humanity's inevitable doom into what he is now, our only salvation and our ultimate unavoidable fate. For the Dark King is coming, and he is the Emperor. That much has been confirmed. All that remains to be seen is when. How much longer can the corpse on the throne hold out against his own basic nature? The Emperor played us all, in-universe and out here in the real world too. For all Chaos's power comes from the source, from the wellspring we know as the Primordial Annihilator. Big E did not have to steal from or bargain with the gods. To me, that is the cover story. They are subordinate to him. Or they will be one day, should he ever falter for even a moment, and birth the Dark King. The Emperor of Mankind may be the Imperium's attempt to take real space, the ultimate weapon of chaos, the avatar of the Primordial Annihilator, sent as a conqueror. And him being born as a man, it may well all just have backfired in their faces, as the Neverborn had no clue what coming into the physical universe as a flesh and blood being would do to his psyche. And it does also seem as though perhaps the Emperor was not always aware of just what he was. Perhaps he learned the truth on Moloch. Perhaps he learned during his time on the throne. Or perhaps when he nearly became the Dark King aboard the Vengeful Spirit. It's hard to say, but one thing we know for sure is that the rotting corpse on the throne, the space lich extraordinaire, who Fulgrim claims is just fully dead, is not all there is to the Emperor of Mankind. And with Cypher's arc, Valdor's arc, the possibility and probability of Layman Russ returning soon, all tied into the Bequin series, the King in Yellow, the Amazon show, etc., something is definitely happening The lore may just be on the verge of taking a huge step forward for the first time ever, like a lumbering titan come to smash us all. A giant stride that began during Rogue Trader that is about to make footfall, and we're just in its shadow.